Hey, how's it going, guys? So we're back with another Star Citizen video. If you're new channel, welcome. We're gonna be checking out another Architect reviews video. So shout out and credit goes to the Morphologis for the video. And we're gonna be checking out an Architect reviews the Anvil Carrack Star Citizen. Now, the ship, I already have some idea what it is. I do remember the commercial. It's saying like it's a home, basically a ship that it can accommodate your needs of a home. It can fit a smaller starship in there, and it looks comfortable and everything. And it's also, I forgot which ship it was, but it was rivaling another ship that was basically main purpose was exploration and also providing comfort and a place to live as well. So man, I don't remember that ship's name. But anyways, without anything else, let's just jump into the video.
If you've ever dreamed of sailing the stars and discovering new worlds, then Star Citizen's newest ship promises to deliver the perfect vessel to accommodate you on your mission. Hey guys, I'm Morphologis and welcome back to an Architect Reviews, the series in which I utilize my skills in the field of architecture to examine something in the digital realm. Today I'm taking a look at the very much anticipated Anvil Carrack, and because of this anticipation, it has taken some time for me to digest this ship properly to be able to convey to you my thoughts about both its exterior and interior. For me, I've found it to be a mixed bag, with both good and not so good moments. So in this video, I'm going to take you from deck 1 all the way up to deck 4, top to bottom, bottom to top, and talk to you about its failures and successes, and by the end, hopefully you'll have learned a little bit more about architecture and design. If you did and you like what I do, and you want to see more, don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and bell icon so you know the next time I post a video. Unlike other popular ships I've reviewed on this series, the Anvil Carrack is not a luxury traveling ship. It's an exploration vessel, and so it doesn't have the same requirements as those big luxury ships like the 600i and 890 Jump. For that reason, it makes a lot of sense that the way you get on and off the ship would be through the vehicle bay, because you would have to use those vehicles to explore the sometimes very hostile environments that this vessel is built to go down and
Makes
see.
sense.
This space is also really starting to show how evolved CIG's design process has become. Not only have they comfortably sized it to fit up to 2 Ursas, but they've also made a lift on the floor to stop you from blocking the access door, which is a very smart thing to design in. They've also carefully considered how you might traverse the decks on the ship should the power go out through this, what I like to call Jeffrey's tube, because well, I'm a Star Trek nerd, but basically an access ladder that can bring you all the way up and down the ship, save for deck 4, which we'll go into a little bit later in the video. Just past the vehicle bay is a sensibly placed airlock that brings us to the outside and how you'll likely enter the vessel in the future once station to ship and ship to ship docking becomes possible. They've also smartly located a number of EVA suit lockers in this airlock to allow for you to enter spaces that might not have any oxygen in them. What I like best here though is the careful consideration of program adjacency. In this case, it's where you have the vertical circulation relative to the ingress point. Here, the elevator to take us up to the command deck is directly located next to both major ingress points, the airlock to the station as well as the lift that takes us out onto the surface of a planet, or in some cases the deck of a landing zone. This is a programmatic understanding that unfortunately was not present in ships like the Starfarer, which I need to review at some point still. Beyond that, we find ourselves in one of the Carrack's 3 large detachable cargo pods, a place that rivals the size of even the Caterpillar, which are mostly metallic grays highlighted by red and red lights, which I find to be quite attractive and distinctive from the rest of the decks we'll find on this ship. Just beyond the 3 cargo pods, we'll find ourselves in the armory and suit locker section of the ship. I imagine this is where you might store your EVA suits that are armored, as well as your complement of weapons or tools that you might utilize on your trips down to the surface of hostile planets. The space down here is generously sized, and I find that here near the turret area, it might have just a little bit too much space. They may have considered giving more space for storage somewhere on the ship, but it's hard to know without having a 3D model. Back in the armory though is the lift that brings us up to the upper decks of the ship, and our next stop, Deck 2, Habitation. It's completely exposed, which I think is a little bit of a strange design choice. I would imagine that this is not a place I'd like to be if the grav gen goes down and I'm in here while we're doing maneuvers. I won't want to get stuck in between the elevator and the wall. But it works. And here we are, Deck 2 Habitation. Here we are on Habitation, where the crew is going to spend most of their time off duty. Here, things are a little bit different than on the subdeck. The hard deck plating of subdeck 1 are replaced by soft pads on the wall here, on deck 2. And the lighting is also changed.
Makes sense.
We also get a bit of a...
Giving it a little bit more comfortable vibe and feeling compared to somewhere that needs to, where all the work is being done. That kind of like, how workplaces, they have like, hard floors and things like that. But then when you come back home, you have like, carpet and a soft couch or something like that. So basically, soft area, like those kind of like soft areas, like a soft wall, padded walls or like carpet is basically just a good sign that you're in a place where you can finally relax and loosen up a little bit.
Peek into the med bay, which is one of the cooler parts of the Carrack and what makes it such a great exploration vessel. Stepping through an emergency bulkhead though, things completely change. The relatively cool blues and reds of the subdeck are replaced here by warm colors which are more comfortable for living conditions. As we've covered in earlier videos, humans tend to prefer more sunlight type light sources in longer stayed living conditions, such as in the 3500K range, whereas brighter, say 5000K lights are more suited to working zones. But first, let's take a step into the sick bay, because it's a pretty cool little design.
I think I did see a little bit of it
that
in
this actually has its
commercial.
own airlock, which makes a lot of sense. It would be good for doing something like bringing aboard somebody who may have become infected with some sort of new alien virus, or if you'd like to bring a very special sample on board that you wanted to, say, study and examine, but may be dangerous to the crew.
Yeah, it looks like a decontamination.
The design itself is very clinical, and I think they've done a very good job of making it different than any other part of the ship. It screams medbay without having to say it with large signs. The centerpiece though, and the most important part of the medbay, is the medical bed that sits in the center and at the heart of the ship. This makes sense because it is what's going to keep you alive out there in the verse. Just adjacent to it is the Chief Medical Officer's office. And that is so cool to have aboard a ship in Star Citizen. It's got a great view onto the medical bed for doing, say, examinations of possible contaminated crew members or people that you've encountered or alien species. And then just across from that is the medical storage room, which is where you're going to store all your samples and
it does look
medicine
cool, though.
to keep the crew alive on those long missions. Overall, it's one of the better parts of the ship, and I like how they even thought to change the height of the floor in the space. It does perhaps suggest a hierarchy of importance of the medbay in the ship. Stepping back into the hallway, I also encountered a
Medical posts on ships, bases, no matter where you are, will always be very important.
bit of a strange design choice here with the exposed lift. This is the same small lift that we saw earlier down on the lower deck. Now the issue I have with it is that it's connected with no airlock between decks 3 and 2, which means that if it were to be decompressed at any point, it would decompress both decks, which is a design oversight. Difficult as it may have been, I may have considered instead a way to create a door there so that it would be sealed. Moving on now to the mess hall, it showcases a very interesting design choice on the part of CIG to create a split level design where some of the decks are slightly lower, slightly higher than other parts of the ship. There may be an underlying need for this to have happened considering the amount of space on board, but it may actually just be that that's the way they wanted the ship to look, and I actually quite like it. More specifically though, I really like how they located windows directly across from one another here in this design, enabling you to effectively see through the entire ship's width. This has the effect of extending the space virtually without actually making them bigger, and I think that's a good thing for a small vessel on long journeys to relieve that cabin fever syndrome you might get from being cooped up in one place for too long. Windows also visually connects the different programmatic elements of the ship so that you always can kind of see what's going on with the rest of the crew, but also where you are in the verse. Being on an exploration vessel is about exploring, and wanting to see the outside, I imagine, would be an important thing for those on.
That is a cool looking pool table. I remember that from the commercial. Basically, the commercial really did just give a brief overview of the entire ship, but now we're breaking it into detail with Morphologis.
Board. We're now here across from the mess hall in the rec room though, and this is where crew will kick back and relax again between shifts, maybe play a bit of this very hard looking space pool. Just next to that and through this door you'll find the ship's head, going through another hexagon shaped door. You'll find these throughout the ship, however there are some rectangular
that's actually pretty
and even
big.
square doors, which makes me wonder if they should have just thought of using the same sort of door throughout the ship and been more consistent. Now, across from that door, you'll find the racks for the crew, and this comes equipped with 5 total. Now, this does seem to be enough for the ship, though it would be nice to have a few more just in case you wanted them. There seems to be enough space to add at least 1 more rack, but you can always hot rack with this, and so it might not be too much of an issue. I again especially like that they're using
I mean, sure, maybe you could fit 1 more rack in there, but you're gonna make it a little tight squeeze. So I say 5 is good because everyone wants their space, or at least have, you know, a little bit more open area and not be really cramped up. And I'm speaking from experience.
very light grays and whites here in the crew quarters to make the space feel bigger. Remember that dark colors compress space visually and can make it feel less comfortable than it might otherwise feel. I also like the selection of lighting in the bunks themselves. Their fall off is limited enough to make them feel comfortable and not too bright, and it definitely feels like a space I'd want to get some rack time in. One of the benefits of not having too many racks in here though is it is pretty comfortably sized. Heading back into the hallway, our next stop is going to be in the captain's quarters, which is one of my favorite, if not my favorite space on the ship. The captain's desk is almost throne-like in the space, which makes sense since the captain is essentially king aboard his or her own ship. I also like the ample amount of storage to display your knickknacks as you've collected them in your travels around the verse. But also notice how they've raised the ceiling just above where the captain sits, giving prominence to this space. I've talked about this in previous videos, so it's really cool to see them utilize this technique as a method of giving hierarchy to this space subconsciously. Overlooking the ceiling plane is a common mistake of less experienced designers, and it's clear here that CIG is on the top of their game. They've also again used different temperature lights here in this more intimate space, giving it a much more comfortable feeling. But the designers aren't without their own sense of humor. If you look closely at this champagne bottle, you might notice a familiar name.
Chris Cordial? Or, wait. What's that say? Gene?
Yes. Just to the right of the captain's desk.
I don't get it. Or am I just missing something here? If you guys know what he means by the name of the champagne, could you please put down in the comments below?
Yes.
I don't know.
Just to the right of the captain's desk is the captain's private bunk and private head, which again are utilizing a warmer temperature, specifically where the captain sleeps. I really again like this attention to detail. Color temperature and lighting is again an often overlooked design feature that is really important to making a space feel comfortable. If this were all evenly lit and very high temperature blue-like lighting, I'd imagine it would feel very clinical, sterile, and uncomfortable. But now let's step back on the turbo lift. Okay, there's nothing turbo about it, but let's step back on the lift and get up to Deck 3, which is described as the technical deck, and you'll see exactly why that is when we arrive.
I don't know why, but the ship doesn't look that big on the outside, so I'm just surprised that there's at least 3 floors on there.
Arriving here on Deck 3, you'll notice that the palette has once again changed.
That's just me.
That Anvil likes to specify dark grays and reds for their working spaces, which is a pretty, let's say, handsome look. The lighting, though, is a bit dark, but I'm willing to overlook this because it does set the mood quite well here in this space. It may not be practical in the real world, but here in Star Citizen, it looks pretty freaking cool. One strange note about this, though, is that when I first saw images of this deck on the website, I thought that this was on the lower decks. It's a bit strange to me that they should set the angle of the walls kind of as if you were in the hold of a ship on the upper decks. I'd prefer that to maybe be in a different direction, maybe flipped. I also took note of their attention to detail when it comes to how they're ventilating the space. HVAC is definitely not something required for an internet spaceship, but they took the time to think about how you would run oxygen up and down its decks. Here in the center of the space, you can clearly see ventilation holes as well as ducting that goes from the forwardmost part of the ship all the way to its stern. Now let's step into the drone bay. This is one of the reasons why this is called the technical deck. It's here you'll be able to maintain and deploy your drones for various missions such as repair, mining, or exploration whilst you're on mission. It's a pretty neat space, and I like how they've got these louvers over the windows just in case something, say, explodes. I also like that in this space that there's a bit of exposed structure, which gives us a little bit of an idea of what the Carrack might look like just under its skin. Smartly located across from the drone bay is the workshop of the ship, and this is where you're going to be fixing things like your EVA suits, your armor, your weapons, any modules that may have gone down. You might even use the 3D printer here to make some new ones.
Oh, that's a 3D printer?
I also think that even just having a repair bay on board is a really great idea for a long-range vessel that will not be able to return to port as often as other ships when they're out on the frontier. I think that's again what makes this ship feel so polished, that they've thought of so many things. Stepping back into the corridor, we're greeted with the shuttle bay, which we'll be visiting shortly. I just want to show you quick where the Jeffries tube ends here on the upper deck. It's called a service ladder here on the ship, and you can see this is how you might get all the way up to the technical deck should the power go out.
I like how it has a mind your step on the ground.
Now, the shuttle bay is a really important feature to have on the Carrack because it enables you to do things like park your ship in orbit and go down in a much more fuel-efficient vehicle. Fuel in the Carrack's expensive, but more importantly, when you're out in space and you're very far from port, it's not a good idea to be wasting fuel going down into a very thick atmosphere or into a gravity well that's very difficult to get back out of. The hangar bay is also consistent with the rest of the ship with its very angular style of walls, but here it actually comes into play as being pretty useful. Because the opening is larger than the pad, it makes it a lot more simple to get a vehicle down in here. In fact, if you accidentally hit a wall, they'll kind of direct you down onto the pad. You can also get a glimpse of the airlock and observation room on Deck 4 just above the hangar and overlooking it, which will
really cool.
Our next stop after we complete our visit here of the technical deck. Now, just beyond the hangar, you'll find yourself in a fairly large corridor that will lead you to the elevator that takes us up and down the ship, which we visited a little bit earlier, and if you access these side corridors, you'll find the access hatch to either the port or starboard side turrets. Its access corridor is very reminiscent of, say, something from the Millennium Falcon.
Oh yeah.
I quite like it, and the ball turret's a heck of a lot of fun to use.
And the ship...
Moving even further aft...
Wait. And right there, the chair is just a silhouette at the end. That's a pretty cool image.
I like it, and the ball turret's a heck of a lot of fun to use. Moving even further aft, we find ourselves in the rearmost section of the ship, which is engineering. This to me is a really well-designed space. Not because I know anything about engineering aboard spaceships, I don't think many of us do, but because they had to go about making the space convincing enough to feel like the engine room of a spaceship. And it's also one of the first dedicated engine rooms we've gotten in Star Citizen, and I think they've done a really good job. It spans 2 decks, giving you multiple access points for the many modules that you're going to have to maintain in the final version of Star Citizen. And the nerd in me can just imagine running up and down these decks repairing things as we're in battle or as we just need to keep the ship afloat while on a long mission. Often in architecture, we try to create something that evokes an emotional response. And I think this is one of those spaces in this ship that does that. It's not what you might think when you think of good design, like a really well-crafted space with beautiful sweeping curves on the walls. Rather, they've paid really close attention to the detail work here to make it more convincing that this could be a real science fiction engine room, with exposed cables, structure, accessible panels, interesting lighting, and yes, even some moody mist. So of the many spaces aboard the Carrack,
the red lighting looks cool.
One of the most wildly successful ones. Spaces aboard,
especially right there, the red lighting and looks like a little smoke coming up. That's really cool.
The Carrack, as you may have been able to tell from this review so far of the interior, I've not found many faults with it. That's because I think they did a really good job with the interior of the Carrack. But
wow,
we're not done yet.
A lot of praise coming from Morphologis.
It's time to take a step onto the Stellar Cartography deck, which is Deck 4. Now, I said earlier that there was a Jeffries tube that could give you access to multiple decks of the ship should it be powered off. Now, there's one big design flaw in this ship, and that's there is no Jeffries tube to Deck 4, and so should the power go off, you will not be able to access this without having to EVA outside the ship or crawl up the elevator shaft itself, which seems like a pretty dangerous prospect, especially if the elevator has become jammed or is stuck on the 4th deck, completely cutting off access. Stellar Cartography, though, itself is pretty gorgeous. I have to wonder, though, why there are no seats. It seemed like a kind of uncomfortable place to work if you're sitting here for long periods of time, charting out paths forward. It would seem to me that you'd want...
Yeah, I could see it. Maybe you could put at least a few chairs or like, you know, those long benches on the outside, kind of like curving around in a circle, like, you know, matching the circle design. I could see that because naturally, sometimes instead of just standing there, and if you are going to be there for a long time, maybe you just want to sit down and still look at the map and just you know, collect your thoughts. So I say that would be one slight flaw. I mean, that or just bring a lawn chair or something.
On some readout screens or something of that kind here on this deck, especially because there's nowhere else on Deck 4 to actually sit down. So while short shifts would probably be okay, if you're working up here 12 hours, that might be a bit of a pain on the legs. But maybe that's just a minor issue. Maybe the suits themselves keep you supported. You've also got access to an EVA airlock just up here on Deck 4, which will lead you out just above the Carrack's hangar bay. It's also got some additional suit lockers, of course, because you would need to have a place to store your EVA suit. But one of the curious parts of this deck isn't what's here, it's what's not here. Because it overlooks the hangar bay itself, you might expect to find some sort of console up here that would give you access to it and allow you to operate it.
EVA.
And with the amount of space in this airlock, there's more than enough room to add an auxiliary access point for the hangar bay. If they do come back and do a second pass or a third pass, I'm not sure how many passes I've done already on this, I think that would be a great addition to have just in front of this window. But we need to turn now to our last stop on board the Carrack before we examine its exterior, and that's the bridge. For the intrepid explorer, this is where you're going to be spending the majority of your time, and as such it should be a very well treated space. In my opinion, it doesn't disappoint. It boasts one of the best views in the entire ship, and actually one of the best views of all the ships in Star Citizen, save for maybe the 600i. The view down below is staggering above any moon or planet that you should visit, and it's surely very well suited to the task of exploration.
Are those lockers?
One curious thing about the bridge of the Carrack, though, is that it's actually 2 decks. So if we step over here to this small elevator, we'll find ourselves up on the command deck. So this lower deck is really meant then for the pilot and navigators to control the vessel.
There's an upper
Whereas
bridge
this
and a
upper
lower
deck
bridge?
might be where the commander is spending the majority of his or her time directing the rest of the crew on how to react to, say, dangerous situations, or to respond to signals that they may be trying to locate the source of. Again here, with all the technical spaces aboard the Carrack, they're keeping with this theme of grays and red accents, and it really works
Looks
well
like a gaming
here on the
chair.
bridge, giving it again a very handsome look. I also love the very centrally located hollow table here. It's where people you could imagine would be standing around discussing the next move. There's also a really cool looking command control console here, which actually can fly the ship. Here though, we begin to see a bit of some artifacts from the multiple changes in the size of the ship. There was a time where the Carrack was much longer, much larger than it is today, and I think at that time the upper bridge was supposed to look down on the lower one. Now, because of its size, unfortunately, we can only see what's outside and not what's below, which is a bit of a disappointment because you lose that sense of scale that you might have otherwise had on such a majestically large bridge. Now, you may think that this is the end of the video, but it's not, because we've arrived now at the sore spot for me for the Carrack. I think the interior was done wonderfully. The arrangement of spaces is superb, and the polish is better than any ship that I've seen so far.
He hasn't said
However,
many flaws.
when we take a look at the exterior's form, it is a far cry from what was once the concept for it. It was originally a very avian sort of looking ship, a bird of prey if you will, and now it seems a bit more like a penguin of prey. Now mind you, penguins can be fierce creatures, but they don't always look so. Now I think I might know what the issue is. Here's the profile of the current design of the Carrack, and here's my version that I've made some small adjustments to.
Wait, hold on.
And here's my version that I've made some small
Okay,
adjustments
so he just made
to.
some color adjustments.
Again, here's the original and my slightly changed version. I tried pulling back the drop-down bay from the nose slightly to give it a bit of a longer look. I also slimmed down the underside just slightly and added a bit more definition to the engine that continues the line from the front and ends it at the rear. And I think that's one of the things that made the original design so successful was the separation of the upper and lower part, making it seem a lot more slender than it was. Here as a reminder though is the original concept that we got. Now I think the newer version actually has better design elements than the original, but the original still has something over the current one, and that's its very slender look. This version you see on the screen now, though, was one that was posted a little bit later. An actual model that they had in game when the ship grew to a much larger size than it originally was advertised as. Now, I think they had to do this because they weren't able to get the concept to look like they wanted to, with the interior spatial requirements. Ultimately, though, those spatial requirements won out over making it look more like the original concept. And I think that's okay. It is unfortunate that it doesn't look quite as good as the original concept work, but it's not a bad looking ship, and it's also nice to be able to park it in a large hangar. You must understand that big ships like the 890 can be really cumbersome when you only have a few places where you can actually park it. So having it right there at the max is just fine by me. I still think though that they could slim it down visually somehow to bring it a little bit closer to the original concept. But as it is now, I'm still okay with it. There is one design feature that kind of irks me just a little bit though, and that's their choice of making the rear engine circular instead of their original shape. I don't quite understand the need to try to match the rest of the Anvil lineup, considering all the other Anvil ships are really small. I think they could have set up a new design language for very large Anvil ships and kept the original design just fine. So in sum then, the only really big sore spot for me for the Carrack is its exterior, which can be honed and perfected, hopefully in the future. But if it never is and it stays as it is today, I'm okay with it, and it is growing on me with each passing day. The exploration livery does also help accentuate its more appealing qualities, the upper part of the ship, and kind of minimizes its underbelly, which makes it look fat. After all, it's that underbelly that really is what ruins the look of the ship from the exterior, and if that can be minimized, I think overall it'll be all the better for it. But still, CIG knocked it out of the park here, and they're really showing their skill with each passing ship that they create, getting better and better at honing in on their craft.
Just showing more and more ships.
These guys have done amazing work. But what about you guys? What about this design do you find to be successful or not so great? Let me know down in the comment section below. I love reading your comments and interacting with you guys. Even though this turned out to be a very long video, I still didn't have enough time to cover every nook and cranny of the ship, so I'm sure you guys are going to spot some great stuff. By the way, did you guys know that all the ships you see in this video are community members that just flew with me the other night? That's right, if you want to fly with me, check me over on Twitch
hey, that's cool.
Down in the description below and become part of the Armco community today, which is also found in the description. And of course, I hope to see you in the verse.
It's cool that he got the shot in too. So overall, with the review, I gotta say, Architect Morphologis did not say anything negative with the interior. I mean, maybe just two things, but I don't know if they count as negative. Maybe just like, his opinion, with the consistency of the door shapes and also maybe a place to sit down in a cartography room, which I do agree. But overall, it looks like this ship is great. It meets all your needs for exploration, and the design of the interior really suits Morphologis' taste, because I'm like, the only flaws and negative things he said were on the exterior, as you guys heard at the end, the shape of the engines and all that. But overall, when I saw the Anvil Carrack, I was like, okay, so a place to explore and a place to call home. But I think now it's coming back to mind. I think it was a MISC ship that was like rivaling the Anvil Carrack in like the market of which is the best exploration ship. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was it the MISC Odyssey? I forgot what ship it was, but it was one of the other companies that was like rivaling the Anvil Carrack as another exploration ship and trying to like figure out which one's the best. But then again, that's business. But anyways, this was a really great ship, and the Anvil Carrack is a great ship to have if you're going to go explore. And for me personally, if I was in the game and I want to go exploring, this will be the ship I would use. So that's all I got for today. So thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for watching. Hit that notification bell so you know when I drop another video. And also shout out to all my members, subscribers, viewers. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for your support, guys. I really do appreciate it. So without anything else, I'll see you guys next time.